Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode of the now international Compliance Into the Weeds with Matt Kelly. Matt, welcome, and tell us where you're at today.
Good morning or good afternoon, Tom. I am in Vilnius, Lithuania, to speak at a conference of Baltic and Eastern European compliance and anti-fraud people who are gathering here. I think there's about 150 or 175 people who will be meeting on Tuesday and Wednesday. They graciously invited me over to talk about artificial intelligence, and I am thrilled to be here.
So although I believe the conference begins tomorrow, the day after we record this, any sense of the vibe or anything along those lines you could pass along?
I will admit I only arrived in town a few hours ago, so I'm not quite sure yet, but I am looking forward to this. This is a part of the client compliance community I have not met before. While I have talked to a lot of Western European compliance people over the years, I have never managed to get all the way over here to Eastern Europe and the Baltics. So I am excited to talk about that. And it seems like really at the end of the day, they talk about and worry about the same sort of things that we do in the United States and in Western Europe.
Well, all right. I would note on Radical Compliance, you're continuing your quixotic quest to learn all things AI, and you focus lately on some chatbot issues. And so I really wanted to focus on your chatbot blog part 2. What has got you intrigued about this series of questions?
Well, so here's the thing. Yes, this is the second post I've written now based on ideas and impressions I came away with from a session I attended at the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics conference back in September, where there was a very large tech company. I will not name them here because they don't know I'm talking about them. But if you dig around on the SCCE event website, you can figure out who they are. Very large tech company that built its own policy chatbot to help its 23,000 employees worldwide. It is its own little avatar. I think they named it Ethos or something like that. And you can ask it in plain natural language, policy questions. I want to do this thing with entertaining a client. Is that within policy or not? And it will give you an answer, and it will point to the policy. And in one sense, that is very good and intriguing. However, I was immediately wondering, would this firm be tracking the policy questions that individual employees are asking it? Now, it is worth noting that they said once they rolled this out, I think it was in early 2024, they started to get a lot more questions from employees to the chatbot about policy. I suppose that's good. It means the policy is more accessible and employees are engaging with it more often. But while I was even hearing that presentation, I wondered, are they going to track individual employee requests of the policies and what questions are they asking? From a technology standpoint, the answer is you could do this. But Tom, my first thought was, if you do something like that, your AI system can track individual policy questions asked by specific employees. Are you setting yourself up potentially to violate whistleblower protection laws? And here's how. Employee X asked the chatbot several different questions about a policy. You know, I'm confronted with this thing at work. Can I do it? Can I not? The AI gives them an answer. Several days later, that employee then anonymously calls the hotline and says, there's this thing going on at work. I'm not quite sure what to do, but here it is. You could, I believe, with the right amount of AI and the right amount of data, you could reverse engineer the details in that anonymous report and ask the AI, who probably called up about this on the policy? Who's been asking about these kind of issues before? And now you violated whistleblower anonymity. So I'll stop right there. I'd be eager to hear your thoughts, Tom, about whether this would actually be a legal violation. But I do think it points to what alarms me a lot about AI adoption right now is that we need to slow our roll and understand or be sure that we understand exactly all the implications of how users would experience a AI-driven compliance program versus our more traditional perceptions of the separate, distinct elements of a compliance program, which on the front end with the right AI, like that's not going to exist.
So I guess my first reaction is that would have to be coded directly into the system, meaning the compliance function would have affirmatively had to make a decision to cross those two data sources, because a policy bot should only be looking at policies and procedures of your companies, and it should be ring fenced and it should receive no additional information. The hotline, if you have a third party provider, it should come in from a completely separate line. And even if it doesn't, I really see no difference than someone who has physically called compliance or done FAQs that both can easily be tracked, just doing it faster with AI. So I guess I don't see the same danger, because I think you have to wire that in to have that crossover before we even get to the question of have we violated any privacy laws.
And that's the thing. I would agree with you that you have to build up this wall of separation between the two. And historically, I would think, and GRC technology people out there, call in and correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be fairly easy to do, because it's more accurate to say the system integration required to do this historically would have been really hard. You have one big pile of hotline data over here. You have another big pile of policy question data over there. And trying to get the crossover between the two, you would certainly require pretty sophisticated data analytics. You'd need to extract the data from one and transform it and load it and all that other stuff that software engineers know about. And with AI, no, you don't. With AI, you could really just, if you have not carefully segregated the system, somebody could just ask in very plain language, based on all of the data, look at this hotline data over there, and then match it up with the policy questions we have. Who do you think might have called up about this? Like, what employee was asking about this that is very similar to this anonymous hotline tip? It will get much easier for the AI to do that rather than the traditional technologies, especially if you have an AI layer sitting on top of big piles of data. So, Tom, to your point, like, we really need to make sure, do we have the right segregation of duties to make sure that's not happening, the right segregation of data? Are you sure that some enterprising IT guy couldn't figure out how to do this anyways? I have talked before on this podcast, I'm sure, about the importance of IT general controls. This is exactly what I mean. How can you be sure that somebody will not exploit a weakness in your IT general controls to declare themselves a super administrator or super user or whatever it is, and then turn the AI onto itself to be able to do data analytics much more quickly and easily than historically we've been able to do before. I know that we could do this before, but it was a real pain in the rear to do it before. Now, you have to pay much more attention to the back end design of your program, or else it won't be a real pain to do. And then maybe somebody could do it.
Let me change the focus back to something you started with that intrigues me, which is typically when I talk to compliance officers or I have a podcast, I always talk about the user experience. But you raise the issue of we really need to think through both the user experience and the compliance function experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because you start off by saying, a compliance function might think, this is great. I don't have to do FAQs. I don't have to answer small, straightforward questions. And I get the information on who's asking and where it's coming from. But that could lead to perhaps other issues. So now we need to think about what's the experience of the compliance function in garnering or gathering this information, as well as the user experience in terms of ease of use, accuracy of information, and those sorts of things we typically think about. How do we begin to think about how can compliance begin to think about two things that might be very different?
That's the thing, is I'm not sure, but clearly we need to think about it. So here's an example of what I mean. Consider it from the user's perspective. You have this AI chatbot that people log into their workstation. It rests there quietly in the background, not doing anything until you ask it for some help. I have a question about anti-bribery or entertainment spending. What's our policy on that? And the AI gives you an answer. And then the AI could really just say, would you like any training on this while we're here? Or it could say, would you like to report a concern on the employee hotline while we're talking about this? From the user perspective, there are at least three distinct elements of the compliance program: policy and procedure, training, internal hotline. Three different things that functionally are all the same for the user. It's just an AI chatbot waiting there for you to engage with it. Engage with it how? Any way you want, because it's AI and it can do a lot of different things. So how's that going to work? What if you have a different hotline vendor, different training vendor, different policy management vendor, and then one of them has an AI bot that is going to run point on the other two? Will the vendors agree to that? What if all three offer AI? What if you want a fourth master AI? What if your company has built an AI that could do all of this? Like, we could go on and on and on. But we should remember that while we on the back end think of an effective compliance program as three or more distinct elements, the user won't necessarily experience it like that. I don't think a lot of users would appreciate that they have switched from one system to another as they go from the bot asking them, do you need more help with this policy, to would you like a training module so we can walk through what this looks like? You've switched from one program element to another, but not to the user. The user is just engaging with a bot that did a thing. So we need to make sure that we understand all the implications of that. And, Tom, getting back to your point or my point or your point about my point on could you
Whose
take,
point?
there's just a
Who's
lot
on
of
first?
points. But, could you take hotline data and policy inquiries and match them up to reverse engineer the identity of a whistleblower? I mean, maybe you could. Maybe a compliance officer would do that. I know everybody listening would say, well, we would never do that. Compliance officers are the paragons of integrity and ethics, and I hope that's true. But what if your CEO orders you to do it? What if your general counsel does it on your behalf? What if they get rid of you? What if they go to some underling who doesn't know that they shouldn't be doing this, and the CEO or the CFO or the general counsel says, go do this? And they say, oh, yeah, sure, I'm helping the boss. What's wrong with that? There are new challenges around how to wield a compliance program and the insights it can provide, some of which are going to be great. Some of which could go to very different places, more difficult places, potentially a legal violation if you reverse engineer the identity of a whistleblower. I know that's not new, but historically, when this has happened, it's been difficult to do. But I can think of at least one big bank over in the UK where they fired the guy, the CEO, for trying to root out the identity of an anonymous whistleblower. If that's going to get easier to do in theory, then you're going to have to design your program to be more segregated on the back end in practice. And you're really going to have to focus on who could override those kind of segregations and how are we going to make sure they don't do that. That's the sort of stuff that is concerning to me now as I listen to the potential for AI.
So that was Jess Staley at Barclays. And
Yeah.
Given that everything that's come out about him since then, I would say if there's not a test case for background due diligence before you hire a new CEO, he certainly has proven it time and time again. He is now banned for life from banking in the United Kingdom for that and other actions. So we have had that. And I guess what we're seeing now is, once again, as we talked about in terms of the potentially taking compliance training and AI passing the test, it's just going to happen a lot faster. And so how are you going to respond or prepare, not detect, but prevent, and then move towards detection and remediation?
That is a good question. And I kind of default back to what we had discussed before is you're really going to have to focus on the corporate culture. Like, what sort of a weenie would be such a jerk as to actually skip or subcontract the compliance and ethics training out to the AI? You want to make sure that you're hiring the right people and you have a strong ethical culture that I would never do that. AI is going to make it easier to do a lot of things. Some of them we don't want them to do. So we are going to have to focus more on the corporate culture that I will not do this, even though AI might make it a breeze for me to do it. We'll have to think in those terms. I am still also going to be very curious how regulators would evaluate a compliance program given the complexities or the nuances here. I'll pick on the Justice Department because Lord knows, like, is there anybody left in the fraud section who really is not just under the thumb of Pam Bondi and the other brass there who could not care less about these issues? I don't think. But all of the best and brightest at the Justice Department have generally now left. So how are they going to evaluate a compliance program? At what point might the program say, they're going to upscale their expectations from we want you to do data analytics to we want you to embrace artificial intelligence? AI is a logical continuation of we would like you to embrace data analytics. Now we're going to up it to AI. They have already talked about how they want you to at least think about AI and its risks in your compliance program. But if they start saying you also must use artificial intelligence to measure the effectiveness of your program, I'm not sure the Justice Department knows what that means. I'm not sure a lot of compliance officers know what that means. I think we have some idea of some of what it means about better analytics. You could certainly look at what are people asking about. You could track the number of questions and the number of policy escalations, things like that. There is an argument to be made that tracking the questions that come to a policy chatbot is worthwhile. If you have an awful lot of them from one geographic region, that suggests you have a problem in that region. If you have a lot of them coming from one division, maybe you should revisit what are the policies for that division. But tracking them down to the individual employee is probably not good. And I should stress that the IT firm that built that chatbot that started our podcast, they don't track individual employee questions. But other companies could. What if you buy a policy chatbot from a vendor where that ability is turned on by default? Are you going to make sure to remember to turn it off? How are you going to build in the safeguards so somebody else can't turn it back on without, alerting the compliance officer? There's a lot of different extra implications that we need to think about for how are we going to govern the use of this technology, because it's going to be very powerful.
Well, Matt, that seems like a good place for us to end this episode. Perhaps next Monday you can give us a Vilnius report.
I will indeed. Thank you very much.
Well, enjoy yourself.